The first thing I'd like to do is obviously welcome everybody and thank you for being here. I'm Karen Skinner and I'm a member of the committee, the North Essex and Colchester Committee, which is part of the Essex and Ipswich branch committee as well. I'm also an L&D consultant with my own company, Sharpstone Skinner, and we have been around for about 23 years. So I've been in HR and learning and development for around 30 years, if you like, so all of that hopefully lovely wisdom and experience. We specialise in team leader and individual development and coaching, as I'm sure some of you do on the call as well, because we often have lots of consultants as well as people that are working in HR on some of our calls too. So it's great to welcome you all here. I've spent a lot of my time over the last few months pivoting online for a start, so doing lots of lovely online learning, which actually I'm quite enjoying, having been quite a dinosaur about it in the past. And through supporting the clients that I've been dealing with, I've been gathering all sorts of views and ideas and tips and hints together about how we get ourselves through this whole idea of ambiguity. And so I'm going to bring some of that to the session, some of the information that I've been finding. I've also gone out and grabbed some stuff as well that might be useful to all of us just to have a little look at around this whole area of ambiguity that we've got at the moment. A couple of very tiny case studies for you towards the end as well, and maybe just revisit some classic models. So I'm hoping that what you will be able to get out of this session is a little bit of time to reflect, just to stop and sit back and think, where are we? Where are we in our business? How are our people doing? And what can I do best to help and support people going forward? Refresh some of the things that you've seen before. A lot of the things I'll talk about today are probably not brand new to you, but sometimes it's quite nice just to refresh on them to help us out. Maybe some of what you'll get today is checking it out, because a lot of us work on our own, or we're in small organizations and we kind of looking at our situation and thinking, am I doing okay? Am I on the right lines? So I'm hoping that maybe that will come out of it as well, just to check that you probably are on the right lines with a lot of these things. And then hopefully maybe grab a new idea from the session, either from myself or what I go through, or something pings into your head, or you get that off somebody else on the call. And the sort of sharing of experiences sometimes is very useful when you find out that other people have experienced the kind of things that you have as well, which is great. Just a few rules of engagement for the way that we work online. So you're currently all muted automatically so that we won't be worried by any background noise, Amazon arriving at your door, or somebody putting the Hoover on or anything like that. We suggest you turn off your video just because it's probably easier for you. We can see you, but you might not be able to see the fact we can see you. We have the chat box, obviously. Some of you just been using the chat box. So that's available to pop questions in. And our lovely Jackie, who is apparently officially the producer, because the techie people are producers on these things, she'll be monitoring the questions, and she may well pop up and ask the question at the time, or we will hold them till the end of the session and answer them then. So please pop questions in the chat if you have got something that you particularly want to pick up. We will launch a couple of polls as we go along. There are lots of you, so it's always difficult with really large numbers to do lots of very whizzy things, but we will have some polls which will hopefully keep you going. And the session is being recorded, just so that you know. So it will be available as a recorded item as well, which is lovely. Okay, so many of us are experiencing these sorts of things at the moment. It's difficult out there at the moment. We've kind of gone through the crisis of the first lockdown when it was all very new and confusing and everything. And then it feels like, for many of us, I think, that we're in this funny sort of no man's land now. We're not quite sure what's happening. There's a chink of light with the so-called, vaccine on the way. And then they kind of say it's going to be here, and then, well, no, we might not actually get it until next year. So we're all a little bit confused and uncertain, and there's lots of ambiguity around. Now, many of us of a certain age, as it were, have been here before. So we've been in challenging situations before. If you were around in 2008, in the last recession, You will have survived that. You will have come through it. You've probably thrived from it as well. So I know that when we went into lockdown, one of the things that my business partner and I said was, we came through the 2008 recession. What did we do? What kept us going? What was successful for us through that? And although it's not exactly the same situation, there's an awful lot of resonances in it that's kind of the same. And so we've had the pleasure, if you like, the advantage of being able to draw on some of our experience. But one of the things I'm hearing, and I'm sure you are too, is that we've got young people around. These lovely millennials and all those kinds of generation X's, Y's, K's and B's or whatever they are. And they've never been through something like this before. And that's fine. They're not supposed to have done. But I think in this world at the moment, we've got some challenge, particularly around young people and how they're dealing with ambiguity, because they haven't faced this huge amount of challenge before. And maybe in some of your organizations, you're getting that as well. You're thinking, actually, some of our younger people are struggling a little bit with this. And it could be because they've never done this before. They've never had these kinds of big challenges. And so part of what we're doing today, I think, is maybe bearing in mind those young people and how we can help them through this. Us wise old owls can help people through, because we know life goes on and we will get through this, and this too shall pass. And we've got lovely platitudes for it. So hopefully today's session will also give us some practical tips and ideas around it too, and a chance to reflect around what it must be like if you've never been through something like this before. This is a useful quote to keep us going today, that growth is uncomfortable because you've never been here before. You've never been this version of you. And so give yourself a little grace and breathe through it. That might be really applicable to all of you on the call today, but it's particularly applicable, as I've said, to the younger generation who haven't been here. So we need to give them grace. We need to help them breathe through it and ensure that they come out and have learned some really good stuff from this, for when, hopefully this doesn't happen again, but for when they have another big challenge in their careers and their lives, and they can draw on this in terms of their learning and take that forward, which I think would be a very strong thing for organisations to be able to do with their young people as well. But obviously we're not just talking about young people today. It's just a particular focus that I'm getting a feeling is going on out there. That there's lots of people who are going through this and are finding it very difficult and very challenging, both at work and personally as well. I think that's one of the big challenges of this. It's such a double whammy, this vaccine. It's not just, the economy's a bit wobbly, it's everything is a bit wobbly as well. One of the things I often bear in mind through these things is this idea of a bumpy road, which is all about building resilience. So as we all know, really, if you choose the smooth path all the time, if you choose the path of least resistance all the time, you tend to have low resilience, because it's the bumps in the road, the challenges in the road that enable us to learn, to find out what we're capable of, to help us be determined and focused and have a sense of purpose about what we're doing. And it also is about having the dips in the middle. We must look after ourselves too. We must have some self-care around. And for some of us, we might feel in organisations that we've been doing an awful lot to help the people that work for us. I've been hearing some stunning examples of what employers are doing for people. And there's a huge sort of warmth out there, in a sense, for a lot of the people I talk to about their organisation and about how they've been supported and helped. And, there's loads of welfare initiatives have started that were kind of starting already anyway, because we were beginning to move into those worlds a little bit before lockdown as well. But some employers really have gone above and beyond and have really kept people secure. They've kept people informed, lots of communication. They've got employee wellness programs happening with external suppliers. So there's lots of stuff that's happening for the troughs, if you like. And the bumps in the road are the ways that we can learn. And one of the big themes, I think, around things like ambiguity is what we learn from it, and ensuring that we do learn, that we're often capable of more than we think we are. So in a sense, we don't want to steamroll a life for those people that work for us. We don't want to make their road too bumpy, but it's about helping support them in having a rest in the trough of the bumpy road, but also using the bumpy road to learn from too, and to strengthen them up. for when hopefully the door opens and the world becomes a little bit clearer. So what are we exploring today on our session? I'm going to take us through just like what on earth is happening at the moment. Then we're going to look at the change curve. Now, you might groan at this point and go, oh, I've done the change curve a million times, but the change curve has got a bit stuck for a lot of us. We're finding it really difficult to come out the other side. So I wanted to introduce you to this concept of a waiting room, which is often where we are in this particular change curve at the moment. And then something about getting ready for clarity, getting ready for the moment when things do clear up. What are our challenges in HR for when clarity comes? Because there's quite a lot of them. There's things around re-establishing boundaries again, for example, triggering the right sorts of behaviours now. So I just thought it might be useful for us to have a little bit of a reflection on those kinds of issues as well. And then, of course, some questions and sharing of your wisdom too, because it won't all come from me by any means. So what we've had recently is this idea of change. And as we know, change can come in three main forms: shock, it can be evolutionary, it can be strategic. So for many of us, probably all of us, the lockdown was a shock. Although we kind of saw it coming, but I think when it happened, it was a bit of a shock. I mean, I can remember gathering around the radio. I don't know why we did it on the radio and not the TV, but I can remember doing that when Boris was speaking and you'd be kind of hanging on his every word. And I began to realise what it must have been like in World War II when people came around the radio and listened to Winston Churchill. And you could sort of see the train coming down the track. But when the announcement was made, I don't know about you, but I had a little bit of a shock. Suddenly, it was quite unexpected. I wasn't quite sure what was going to happen. And then, of course, in the workplace, we have lots of evolutionary change, things that gradually emerge over time, that it's quite obvious it's going to happen, that we have to evolve a new way of doing something, or we've got new technology, so we evolve that and bring that into the workplace as well. And then, of course, we have strategic change, which is always intentional. The organisation has looked outside, scanned the horizon and gone, we need to change in a certain way. And through times of ambiguity and great challenge, sometimes it's quite useful to work out what kind of change it is for our people. Is it a shock? Is it evolutionary? Is it strategic? Because many human beings will respond to those different types in slightly different ways. So we all, I don't know about you, but I get frustrated with the stereotype that people don't like change. They're scared of it. Actually, we're not scared of change. We're an amazing human race, really. Over the last 50 years, we've had the most incredible amount of change in technology, in the way things are done, in our communications, in the way the economy works, all sorts of different ways. And we have adapted to them. We've adapted to them. We've welcomed them. We're fine with them. But we also understand that it's when change is outside your control that it's more worrying and stressful for people. And this situation we're in at the moment is particularly one that's out of people's control. And so we do have to understand that some people are scared and worried in the middle of all of this too. And I'm sure that's what you're dealing with in your organisations at the moment, the responses to the shock of the change, because we couldn't really see it coming and we couldn't hugely plan for it either. So let's examine, just from all of us in a way, that this idea of, suddenly we're all based at home at the beginning of that first lockdown. Now, I'm also aware we've certainly got somebody from Wales who didn't go into a second lockdown either. So apologies to Wales or Scotland or Northern Ireland if they're in on this call. Because the next poll the first poll I'm going to ask you to do is around the first and second lockdown. So if you haven't had a second lockdown, just think about some of the new things that came in, the new restrictions that came in for you. So when we have a shock of a change, we have an emotional response potentially, and we may be sad, mad, wary or glad. So sad because the old way of working is going, and I kind of liked my processes and procedures. I liked the way I work. It was smooth, it was easy, I knew where I was. You might be mad. You might be upset that a project's been derailed, or something that you were really passionate about has now had to stop because it can't happen in lockdown. You might be mad because you're out of control of that change and that makes you angry. You like to be a bit of a controller of a situation. Interestingly, you might be glad. A lot of people were glad in lockdown because they felt safe. Some people are glad because it's a different way of working. It's new, it's different. It's, this is interesting. Let's see what this is like. And then some of us are wary. Well, yeah, we can kind of see why it's happening, but I'm not quite sure how that's going to work for me and for others. So what I'd like to do is just try and find out what the mixture is out there of your particular ways of dealing with it. So I'd like to invite you to do a poll on the first lockdown and a poll on the second lockdown. And I'd like to ask you to vote on whether you were sad, mad, wary, or glad. So on your screen now, you should have the poll and you should be able to input into it. And you have, look at that, you're all starting to get your votes in there. That's lovely. Nobody's mad at the moment. That's interesting. So I've got 30 of you voted so far. I'm going to wait and see if all 37 are going to vote, and then we will end the polling. That's great. Thank you. So I'm up to 32 out of 37. So let's see where we get to. So I'm going to give you about 15 more seconds to vote if you want to vote, and then I'll end the poll. Okay, lovely. So I'll end the polling and let's share our results on how we were doing in the first lockdown. So overwhelmingly, we had 47% of you were wary. Let me see what it's like. Never really worked from home before. Wonder what it'll be doing. Is everybody going to be okay? Maybe. So interestingly, some of you are glad. I mean, I do wonder whether that's driven by a safety thing, as well as an exciting to do something new. Quite a few of you were sad. 21% of you were sad about it. And we did have one mad person in the room, which is great. Because maybe something derailed, or you were angry about the whole idea of having to do something in a new way. So what I'd like to do now, out of interest, is to ask you about how you reacted to the second lockdown, because the second lockdown was slightly different because we sort of thought we knew it was coming. So you may have had a slightly different response to it. So let me launch the polling again. And again, for those of you that didn't go officially into a second lockdown, when some more like the tier system came in, or, Wales had a particular type of lockdown while other people didn't. So let's see where you go with this one. Great. Now, these are slightly different. We have here, replacing a large amount of you being wary, we've got glad. So again, that might be a function of, I just wanted to get rid of the virus. I was quite glad because I'd quite like Christmas, quite like Christmas to happen. We've got more mad people here. Yeah, that's really interesting, that the anger sort of raising people. We've got slightly more sad people as well, and much less wary people. Perhaps the wariness has dissipated because we got used to the way of working. So maybe we weren't as worried about it anymore. Now, I know there will be lots of different types of explanations behind how you scored, and maybe you scored slightly differently. So I'm just sort of guessing at some of the reasons why. But what's interesting is that your response to it was different the second time round. So it could be that the first one was a shock and we had a very particular response to it. The second time wasn't so much of a shock. It might even have been seen as a sort of evolutionary change because you could kind of see it coming. Or you could argue it was a strategic change where we were being let in more to what the plans were and where we might be going with it all. So it just shows us that we may not have the same response to changes as everybody else. And we ourselves might respond differently to different types of changes too. And I'm sure in your workplaces, you have been experiencing that. So you've had people who are responding in sad, mad, wary and glad ways. And I'm sure within the work that you're doing and within your organizations or inside or outside as consultants, you've been dealing with those kinds of emotions in different sorts of ways and recognizing that people, as we know, have an individual response to it. And as I've said, it's often down to the nature of that change in the first place. These are some of the things that I picked up. I over the first lockdown in particular, flowing into the second one, I did quite a lot of what we call wellbeing chats for organisations I work with, where they wanted an external person to check with their people because they felt I might get a slightly more genuine response from people. And these were some of the themes I was picking up from people. So I had things like some people were excited about a different way of working. They genuinely liked the idea of doing it this way. Some people were very positive, and then they started missing people. They realized they started missing particularly the coffee chats. I'm sure you've had that experience where people have missed that little informal chat that they have with people while they make a cup of tea. Office-based staff, particularly, I found, were coping and they were fine, but then they got lonely because they were more used to that interaction, I guess. Some people felt pressure to keep connected. I think pub quizzes were really, really popular at first, and then people started to go, do I really have to do a pub quiz on a Thursday every night? Do you know, an awful lot of new people started during lockdown. I'm sure you had that in your organisation. So I've just arrived and I'm a bit nervous because I'm not meeting people face to face, I'm meeting people online. Some people literally just felt personally safer at home and they were happy to be at home. Some people then again felt disconnected. Those with children had a really tough time in the first lockdown, and they're having a much easier time in the second lockdown, I've been finding, because the children are at school. Some people were really proactive. They got up very quickly from lockdown and started creating communities of support and were really proactive about doing that kind of thing. And then some people went into crisis mode and then calmed down. So sort of ran around like a headless chicken and then kind of got a grip, as it were. Some people were feeling there was no work-life balance because there wasn't the commute sometimes for some people. And interestingly, other people loved the work-life balance because they were getting to spend more time with their family and their children at the time. Some people were sad because the old way of working had gone and they were finding it difficult to readjust. And of course, people were feeling uncertain. Some people had very practical things like, I have no space to work. I did have one of the people I spoke to had started off working on her ironing board because she literally had no other flat space to work in. And some of us found it difficult to get around the slower pace. I know I've really struggled with that. It's that thing where you can put things off till tomorrow because there's time to do it. And so you end up with really, really bad deadlines at the end of the day because you really should have done it last week when you had loads of time. So again, lots and lots of different types of responses. And I'm sure you've had lots of those as well with your people, knowing that people have had a slightly different situation at home, and therefore that's driven their particular response. So just going back to that shock and evolutionary change and strategic change and everything, what's interesting about it, of course, is that some of this change can have different types of reactions, but also it's usually about the transitions, not the change itself. So, for example, we have William Bridges, who's written a book called Managing Transition, says it isn't the changes that do you in, it's the transitions. The change is not the same as the transitions. So in other words, we can sit on the riverbank, if you like, and think, yeah, okay, it's okay here. I can see the other bank and I kind of get why we're going there. And then you launch yourself and it becomes really choppy waters and we're not quite sure how we're navigating them. And then there's something really new that comes at us. So we can still sort of see where we're supposed to be going, but it's the choppy waters that get in our way and disrupt us in a way, and are often much, much more challenging than embracing the change itself. And I think a lot of people have experienced that. They dive in thinking this won't be too bad. And then actually everything that it impacts becomes the choppiness in the water that they find difficult to deal with. And of course, that's because we are in ambiguity. We're in ambiguity and we're desperately searching for clarity. And it's not really coming to us at the moment. It's beginning to clear. The fog is beginning to clear for many of us. I don't know about you, but the new vaccine seems to have sort of spurred us on a little bit. It's almost started to feel as if there is light at the end of the tunnel. So we might feel like we're coming out of it in some way, shape or form. But within our businesses and our organisations, you still may not be clear about what's happening. We're still in a bumpy, rocky ride across that river, and we haven't maybe got hugely clear sight of the bank. And that can be really, really uncomfortable. So just to sort of summarise a little bit of where we've gone with that. just maybe some things that I know some of my clients are doing, and I'm sure you are as well. So just summarize some of the practical steps that a lot of people have done in lockdown and I think have really worked and they're continuing to do. So communication, as we know, is absolutely key through all of this. I mean, it almost doesn't need saying, and I think people have been brilliant at doing it. But what I'm hearing is it's important to communicate not just what's happening, but what you don't know as well. So instead of, promising things, just to be able to say, we don't know what's happening at the moment. We don't know if we're going back into the office or not. Some people have gone back into the office, but we're not sure if everybody's going to go back, and being really clear about that. And I'm sure those of you that have been doing that have found that has a really good impact on people. Wellbeing, it has been absolutely paramount for most of us, promoting people's self-care to look after themselves, putting lots of strategies in place to support people too. I'm really impressed with a lot of people I've spoken to about identifying vulnerable people who are living on their own, for example. And you've got some, there's some great employee assistance schemes out there that people are doing as well that have been very, very practical support to people. Giving people security as well has been key, hasn't it, through all of this, which is really good practical steps around embracing the furlough schemes, perhaps allowing people to, or encouraging people to work part-time for a bit and then coming back to full-time. And also these revolving furloughs seem to have worked very well as well. The idea that you go on furlough for 3 weeks and then you come back and somebody else goes on furlough, so that people can keep their hand in and have a bit of structure to their days. I'm also quite impressed where there have been guarantees where you can, but with no false promises. A client I spoke to very early on came out with a guarantee that nobody would lose their jobs through COVID, which was a major statement to make, really. But they said it had a really magical effect on their workforce, because they said they could almost hear the big sigh of relief from people when the first message that came out was that your job is secure. And as they wouldn't have said that if it wasn't true, and they have stuck to their word. And they've been able to make sure that nobody has left apart from under their own steam. So maybe some practical stuff around it. I know that you could probably add loads and loads more as well out there, because people are being very, very creative about this stuff. But it's just useful maybe to see and check out that you're probably doing all of these, and maybe there's a couple that you're thinking, yeah, maybe we ought to up that a little bit. But one of the things I'm also picking up now as we've gone through these months is the atmosphere is changing. The culture of the way we're working is changing as well. It's no longer about an emergency. It's no longer about a crisis. It's now about new boundaries, new ways of working, and just pulling in some behaviours that are not going to help us in the future. And we'll have a little look at those a little bit later on, because I think that's what's emerging now from where we've been in crisis management, and we're coming out the other side. So I want to introduce you to this idea of a slightly different change curve. You've all seen the change curve in your careers, I'm sure you have. I think it's probably one of the biggest model and the biggest way people have been explaining what's been going on at the moment. Everybody's talking about the change curve and riding it and all the rest of it. So look, I mean, this change curve might not look like the one that you use at the moment, but everybody uses them in slightly different ways, but it's the same thing. And as we all know, there's this idea that when we have a shock or something happens or something changes, we go into denial. And so we go into the sort of, the fingers in the ear, la, 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 it's not happening. And that's a kind of passive mode in a way. And then we have this more sort of proactive role, this more active phase that we go through, which is resistance. I'm going to dig my feet in, I'm going to resist all of this because this is ridiculous. And that's quite active, and it can be quite difficult and challenging to manage for some of us when people get quite actively sticking spanners in the works and digging their heels in and those kinds of things. Then unfortunately, there is potentially the trough of hopelessness where we actually get quite down. I don't know about you, but I'm finding a lot of people in this trough at the moment because this thing has just gone on too long. People are missing people, they're missing their families. I mean, I was coaching a really senior woman yesterday in a large organisation who was tearful about it now. She's tearful about her family. She hasn't seen her elderly mother. One of her elderly uncles is in a care home. She can't see him. And she's really getting quite hopeless in her home life. Her work life, weirdly, is still exciting and she's really enjoying it, but she's got this backdrop of a home life that's feeling a little bit hopeless at the moment too. She was also planning to do some relatively reckless things to see her family over Christmas as well, because she's just so desperate to see them. Then we hope we come out the other side. We explore, we think, hey, this is interesting. Let's see what's in it for us. Actually, I can grow through this. I can promote my career through this. And then we hopefully get to this commitment phase where we are fully committed. We're right on in there and off we go. So what we really experience is the zone of disruption at the beginning. Our life has been disrupted. And then we get the zone of innovation towards the end of the curve. And then hopefully the zone of adoption, where we kind of assimilate what's happening. And that is lovely normally. But at the moment, with all this ambiguity and unsureness in the world, we now have this thing called the waiting room. We're sort of stuck. We're stuck in the waiting room of ambiguity, and we're not quite sure where we're going next. And you know the old adage of when one door closes, another one opens. Well, unfortunately, the door is closed, but the other one hasn't opened. So this waiting room for some of us can be quite a dark place to be. And it is the zone of ambiguity. It's the zone of not knowing where we're going and what we're doing. And this sort of zone of the waiting room has all sorts of different effects on us potentially. You may recognize some of these in yourself and in your people. It's stressful in there because we don't know where we're going and what we're doing. It feels like we're continuously being disrupted and having to keep on ducking and diving around all sorts of different things that are coming at us. And we start something and then we can't finish it and we have to start something else. It's quite disruptive in here. We also have a sense of loss, some of us as well. There's almost a grieving process in here for the ways that we used to live. I mean, I almost had a sense of loss about my commute on the train, which I never thought I would have. But I realized that it was a bridge between work and home. And I would do a Sudoku, or I would watch Call the Midwife on my iPad because my husband hates watching it. And I suddenly realized that that funny little corridor of commuting was actually something that I was missing, strangely. I never thought I would. We have to break habits in the waiting room. There's all sorts of things that we have to stop doing and break them because we can't do them at the moment. Obviously, there's instability as well. Many of us are finding it an unstable time where we're not quite sure what the future holds. And of course, that breeds insecurity, that we're feeling quite insecure in this waiting room, not quite sure where we're going. Now, for some of us, the waiting room can be a more enjoyable and more creative space. And for some of us, it really can be the waiting room of gloom and doom, and we're not quite sure how we're going to get through it. So again, as we all know in our professions, we have to be individually focused on people. This is not a blob of people in a waiting room all reacting in the same way. They're probably reacting in all sorts of different ways within this waiting room, depending on the kind of person they are and what their experiences are of it. And as I've said at the early days, you know, it's interesting to see how young people are coping with all of this. So how might people be dealing with it? Some of us are shrinking our world. We are pulling our world in to all of the things that we can control and just sitting in a corner and doing what we can do. I think I've done this a little bit. My house has never been so clean, because I can control that. I can keep my house clean. And I feel like I've shrunk my world into, you know, polishing my dustbin eventually. Hopefully I won't get that mad. Some people are still dreaming of the status quo. They just cannot let go of how we used to work and what we used to do. And they're finding a sense of, you know, I can't move on because I just want it to go back to normal again. Some people have an obsession of looking for the new door. These are the people that kind of batter themselves around off the walls of the waiting room saying, yeah, but you must know what it is that we're doing next. So for goodness sake, give me some direction, give me some vision. I mean, you must have an idea of the next steps to take, surely. And they can be quite disruptive in the workplace. Some people reject any invitations to explore the waiting room because there may well be all sorts of interesting things in that waiting room, but they absolutely will not explore it. They're standing against the wall going, no, I'm just going to wait for the light to come in. Let the light in and then I'll have an explore because at the moment this is too scary. I think now an added thing has come into that waiting room. Some people are starting to be a bit reckless because they are frustrated, and they're starting to do things that are, against the rules, against the good guidance of self-care. They're going places they shouldn't, they're breaking the lockdown rules, all of those kinds of things, because they're just becoming frustrated and angry with the whole waiting there in this waiting room and just being sort of in limbo. And I think something else has crept into the waiting room as well. Some of the things I'm picking up for some of my clients is a sense of entitlement, where I've been looked after all through lockdown, so I can just keep asking for stuff and my employer has got to give them to me. And, oh yeah, performance, what's that then? Making sure that I perform. Oh yeah, I know, but it's a shock at the moment and it's difficult at the moment. I'm working from home. And so, I need to be as comfortable as I possibly can, but don't expect great performance from me. That's such a knotty issue, because of course, as an employer, you're going to support people. Of course, you're going to supply them with things. We have health and safety responsibilities with people working from home, for example. But we're now getting to the point, I think, some leaders are getting to the point where they're going, can I push for performance now? Can I actually ask people to turn up and perform and maybe get out of their pajamas on a Zoom call? That would be great. I did have a woman quite clearly in her fluffy dressing gown the other day on one of my training sessions, and I was beginning to think, really? That's interesting. Maybe you ought to get a little bit dressed up in the morning. So let's have those as our backdrop, but let's also find out what you're experiencing. Now, I know I'm only putting a very few scenarios up for you there, but it would be really interesting to find out if you have been experiencing some of these in your workplaces. So I'm launching a poll for you to just vote on that, or any or all of the things that you have been experiencing in the workplace, just to see where some of the emphasis is at the moment, because we're now in November and we're not in March. Wow, lots of you coming up here. That's great. You should be able to vote on as many or as little as you like. That's great. Lots of votes coming in here. It's lovely. Really interesting patterns. Okay, about 72% of you have voted. So I'll close the polling now and share results with you. So interesting. We've got shrinking the world, sort of sitting back and closing the world in as high, with searching for the new door. That's fascinating, isn't it? That's just like they're almost polar opposites of people who were shrinking back and others who were running around banging the walls of the waiting room. Coming next, we've got that sense of entitlement, which is, as I've said, it's certainly one of the things I've been experiencing. And interestingly, becoming a bit reckless. I do think that is something that's tending to happen at the moment, as we're all just getting so fed up of it all. And then dreaming of the status quo, yeah, that's relatively high too. But it sounds good. Rejecting invites to explore is something that's much lower. So maybe, out there we have more people who are going, yeah, okay, I will explore this, because what else can I do at the moment? So that's really interesting to see that span. But shrinking the world and searching for the new door are very interesting to be the ones that are in the front there, because they are in a sense polar opposites. So that's really interesting. Thank you for that. It's really useful to share that information so that we can get a sense of the pattern of how people are experiencing this new way of living, and the fact that it keeps going on and on and on as well. So let's explore some of the ways that maybe you're dealing with it already, or some ideas of how you can deal with it to help you go forward in this scenario with everybody. Three things really I've been picking up as I've been going around and speaking to clients and working with people is, one, to recognize it's a difficult phase rather than denying it. Encourage people to learn from this phase, and encourage people not to try and rush to the new door. So let me just unpack that for you, just so that you can start, again, a little bit of reflection, or hopefully some resonance with it as well, of the things you've already done. So recognizing it's a difficult phase is about, look, it's a completely new situation. We've got no familiar cues and no precedences for it. So let's not pretend we all know what we're doing here. We know it's difficult and it's difficult for all of us, but we're doing our best in a sense. So getting a message out like that to our organisations to say, we know it's different and we know it's difficult. You've got a complex situation. There are lots of different cues and stakeholder interests to be taken into account. It's so difficult in this scenario to start to think about how that would work. Oh, I wouldn't work for somebody, but that would work for somebody else. And what do our clients want? What do the people that we're working with? What about our customers? What are they after? What do they need from us? So it's quite complex in a lot of ways. You've got to think about lots and lots of different things. And it's really useful sometimes, as we all know, just to say that we know it's difficult at the moment, and sometimes it looks like we've got insoluble situations, things that just can't be solved at the moment. But I've put the word apparently because I've been amazed at the creativity of people, of the different ways that people have gone into this difficult phase and actually found really creative ways of getting through it. And I don't know about you, but I think a lot of us are going to carry on with some of those solutions that we found because they're actually a really good way of working. Lots of organisations have also proved that they can be as productive in these times as they were before, or perhaps even more productive as well. And unfortunately, some organisations have found that their business, the way their business is designed, is really, really difficult to rectify in these times. I think we only have to think about pubs and restaurants, how difficult it is for the leisure industry at the moment to keep everybody going and everything together. So recognizing it's a difficult phase is useful because it's that resonance piece. It's that, I know it's difficult. So for people going, oh, I'm finding this really hard. Yeah, because it's difficult. And that validates how we're feeling, which is always useful to us. Encouraging learning from others. Now, the fact that you've said that not it's not a huge score on actively exploring the waiting room as before. So I'm picking up that maybe a lot of you are being able to do this, which is encourage learning from others, encouraging people to ask for help and support because we're all finding new ways of doing something. Actively seeing things through colleagues' lenses, maybe learning from other people or recognizing what other people need in a slightly different way now. This idea of developing a mindset of abundance, not scarcity. So there's lots of ways that we maybe could solve these problems. Just because we can't solve them in the old way doesn't mean there are not new ways of solving new problems. And being curious, not judgmental about the way that people are reacting to things or doing things or rejigging something that they're doing. And as we all know, going back to the bumps in the road, we learn from discomfort. So there's a huge amount around about, I work with an organisation that does great conversations. I think some people call them quality conversations. So rather than an operational status check on one-to-ones, they do great conversations through the year instead of having an appraisal at the end of it. And one of the things they do a lot is talk about what people have learned about themselves through this process. And again, just checking back in with younger people, I think this is a really useful place to help them because they are in discomfort, and what have they learned about themselves, their resolve, their resourcefulness, so that they're learning from the bump in the road. So it's really useful to learn that because I know when I coach people that people have learned loads about themselves through this difficult scenario and stuff that will probably stay with them. And they've kind of seen a new side to themselves. And I'm sure you've seen a new side to people you work with as well as to how people have responded. So encouraging learning is great when you're still in this waiting room. And then finally, about encouraging people to stay in the moment. Shift gears and change course quickly and easily in ambiguity. Just the whole idea of, okay, we think we're going to go this way. And as we go, things might change. And we need to try and be okay with that. And not keep on going with the same thing because we've got to stop it now. So it's about becoming way more agile. It's deciding to act without the total picture and tolerate situations where things are up in the air. I had a fascinating conversation recently with a director of fundraising, and he said, I sometimes sit here at the end of the day and I turn my computer off and I stare out of the window thinking everybody expects me to have the answer and I just don't know what it is. And I think that's a very realistic moment that a lot of leaders are in, thinking people are looking at me and staring at me and willing me and I just don't know. And one of the things this particular leader does is he leads an awful lot with his intuition, with his instinct. And he said one of the things he started to do and started to struggle with in a way is having a gut instinct about what to do next and having to try and prove and evidence why that's the right way to go to his people. And he's having to try and adjust their mindset to say, sometimes we're just going to have to go with things because they feel right. We can't evidence it. We have no precedence for it, but it just feels like the right thing to do. And maybe you're experiencing some of that. And I think it's useful to remember that gut instinct is always based on lots and lots of your experience. It's not something you've just plucked out of the air irresponsibly. Gut instinct is always based on a great big foundation of experience and skills and understanding your business. And so you can make those gut feel decisions at times like this and go with it because we have no data to go on at the moment. Moving between tasks without finishing one. For some of you who have a preference for a sensory way of taking the world in, you may be hyperventilating at the moment because, of course, those of us with more of a sensory preference love to finish things. We like to plan and we like to finish, and we're finding that really, really difficult at the moment. So do be aware of some of your staff who I'm sure will have that sensory preference of, first of all, I want to know what the plan is and what exactly I'm doing today, and then I want to make sure that I finish it, otherwise I get really upset. You know, I'm like that with Christmas at the moment. I'm desperate to know what's happening at Christmas, but I have found that I can actually stop trying to plan something that I can't plan at the moment. So it is possible for all of us as human beings to move ourselves a little bit, shift ourselves into stop worrying about that. There's nothing you can plan at the moment. So wait until the mist has cleared and then you can get on with planning. And tolerate being uncomfortable with risk and uncertainty. That's something that some of us are really good at. Some of us really enjoy that. You know, you have a preference for intuition. You love things that are a little bit uncomfortable and a little bit not known and much more spontaneous. And others of us find that quite difficult. So supporting our people around a bit of risk and a bit of uncertainty is quite useful when people are stuck in that waiting room. So look, just some practical steps, again, that I've picked up or just summarised from people, and I'm sure these are occurring to you as well, and I'm sure you've done lots of them too. So ensuring teams stay connected so that they can do that learning and they can support each other. Encouraging reflection, like I was saying about the client with the great conversations on learning from what you've experienced and also previous experiences. So those of us, you know, who've been through, for example, you know, the last downturn in the economy, you know, what did you do in that situation? You got through it. Help people create networks of support, have people around them. I know that's happening hugely in organizations where, you know, there's like informal coffees where people have an online coffee with somebody just to shoot the breeze, really. Being open and honest, open about the ambiguity. We don't know, we're not sure. Peer support, using their self-awareness to help others. Sometimes when you've got somebody that's really good at handling this, it's really great to have them as somebody that other people can talk to and they can see that there are actually lots of ways of getting through this. Allowing people to be fed up. I've really picked that up recently. In fact, I've picked it up mainly from staff who were saying, my manager hates me being fed up. I think they get quite stressed by it. But sometimes I just want to go bleh with how fed up I am. And then I'm fine and then I'll go away. So I think sometimes we need to not interrupt people when they're having a little bit of a fed up rant. Individualizing your support, which I'm sure a lot of you are doing because people react in different ways. And this is a really interesting one. This is one that comes up again and again with the people I speak to, is mood hoovers, people who are doom, gloom, negative naysayers, who bring everybody else down. Or, you know, they're the people that whisper in people's ears, I don't agree with that, do you? And you find yourself go, no, I don't either. And it's really difficult to move away from people like that. And I do think it's incumbent very much on HR to find the mood hoovers and convert them a little bit, deal with them, help them become a little bit more positive about things. Because I don't know about you, but I've experienced lots of times where if you've removed a mood hoover from a situation, everybody else suddenly springs back into life, because they've been suppressed by somebody who has a little bit too much personal power. Another one I think is really key as well, to remember we're all adults, that we're all capable of sorting ourselves out at times with a little bit of support. Again, interestingly, I've heard this from members of staff who are saying, I'm slightly fed up of the phrase, how are you? So many people are fed up of that question at the moment. I'm fine, it's a lot of what people answer. Because I think some people feel a little bit like they're in a paternalistic environment where, their every whim or their every worry has got to be attended to. And some people, interestingly, are stopping saying things that worry them because they feel they've got a manager who's going to dive in and sort it out for them. And they're thinking, yeah, it is an issue, but it's fine. I'll sort it out for myself. So it's also recognizing that people are capable of sorting it out if they need to in that moment. So that's a little bit about that waiting room. I think it's also useful now that we can start to think about getting ready for a bit of clarity out there in the world as the fog starts to clear in a way. So how can we get ready for clarity? I wanted to take you back to how people are dealing with the waiting room. Because the obsession with searching for the door, the idea of not exploring the waiting room, and the sort of shrinking the world bit is potentially things that have been dealt with by some of the things we've just talked about. But let's now take dreaming of the status quo and thinking about how we can move people through hanging on to it, if you like. So in order to get people through the idea of keep hankering for what happened before, we know we need to move them on. They need to embrace change, in other words. And as we're aware, there are healthy ways of embracing change and there are less healthy ways of doing that. So let's look at those three areas and what's the healthiest. The level one is compliance. This is our pouty little girl who goes, well, I'll do it just because you've said I'm going to do it, but I don't want to really. That's not a very healthy place to be in change because we're just doing it to shut everybody up and we're not really embracing it. The second level is identification. I did it because everybody else was doing it and I want to be popular too. So people do it because sort of everybody else is doing it, so I better do it, but I'm not really committed to it. I'm just doing it to fit in with people. We don't particularly want that either when people are embracing change. What we're after is intrinsic satisfaction from something. I am wholeheartedly understanding what it is I've got to do in order to make that change. I get that the status quo is gone. I'm now embracing a new way of going forward. And I've internalized that, which means I'm much, much more committed to it, which gives us echoes of the change curve, coming out of the change curve, if you like. So how can we help people through that? I always find this quite useful, the change equation. V plus D plus S is a function that when it's greater than R equals change. So what does all that mean? Well, V is the vision of the future. That we can give people an idea of what the future is, or even better, we can help them look at what the future is. Because if I can understand where I'm going to, I might be able to embrace change a little bit more. D is a dissatisfaction with the present. Not that the way we used to work was awful. It's really important to emphasize that. It wasn't bad. You weren't doing the wrong thing. It's just that we could do better now. We've learnt new ways of working. If we all work at home, we can save loads of money, whatever that may be. So we're kind of dissatisfied with how we were working and we can maybe work in a different way. The S is the first steps to take, some practical ways of moving forward. And those together will help somebody overcome their resistance, which means that they can embrace the change and they can move away from the status quo into the new way of working. And some practical steps around that curve are that we can start to look at the way we involve people with that vision. I bet a lot of you are doing this at the moment, bringing in focus groups, having consultations with people about how people are going to work in the future, communicate it clearly where it is we need to go, what it is that we're doing. Ensuring that they can understand why the present is dissatisfying, not awful, not wrong, but look, the way we worked was actually quite unproductive. It wasn't terribly cost effective. And then supporting the first steps towards getting away from the status quo into working in a new way. And of course, managing any resistance that goes along with it. So that's something about that, moving people through the status quo to helping them, just kind of nudge them. And you know what these things are like? They're like tipping points, aren't they? You get people to a certain place and they tip and then they do it for themselves and they're off, which is great. So maybe that's something about helping with the status quo. What about this sense of entitlement? This is a really interesting area, and sense of entitlement is, for me, around triggers and reinforcers. So what we've done so far, absolutely rightly, this is absolutely what we should have been doing as employers, is allowing people to ask for what they need to make sure they're okay through the COVID time and this different way of working. And when they've asked, we've delivered it. We've made it happen. We've created welfare initiatives. We've made sure that they've got the right chair to sit on in their office. We've adjusted hours for people who are struggling with childcare. And so it means that it's for everybody in the organisation, it's okay to ask for more. And so they do. They ask for more and it gets delivered. So they ask for more. And so what we're doing here is triggering and reinforcing a behaviour. And in the beginning, and for quite a while into it, this is absolutely the behaviour that you wanted to trigger and reinforce. You wanted people to tell you what they needed, what they were struggling with, how the organisation could help them, quite rightly. But it's now become an ingrained habit. It's become a habit of, for some people, an entitlement. I can ask for anything I like and I'm going to get it. So a quick sort of case study for you. This is from an organisation called Marsh Commercial, who are a very large global insurance company. And they've started to move people into the new way of working, if you like, by giving out several messages. They've given out a message of, we will be closing offices, which means that you can work from anywhere. And their new mantra is work from anywhere, which means that work can be flexible. That sounds great. The problem is it's been interpreted as, will you supply all of my office furniture? Will you give me tax relief for working at home? And can I work on Saturday afternoons and take Thursdays off? Because of the triggering and reinforcing of, I can ask for whatever I want and get it. So what they've had to do is understand that they were responsible for triggering those behaviours and responses. And what they've realised is that they now have to create new triggers and new reinforcements. And one of the biggest things they've found they have to do, and maybe you resonate with this, is that they have to establish boundaries. So the boundaries are that it's now the business requirements that dictate what it is we're going to do and how we're going to work. Clients don't work on Saturdays. The idea being that if you're client facing, you have to work against your clients. So when are your clients around? That's when you've got to be around. Excuse me. Look into your own tax situation, because you're a big grown up and you can do that for yourself to see if there's any kind of tax relief about working from home. We will supply office equipment, but only for health and safety reasons, like, sorry, throat's going, only health and safety reasons, like you've got a bad back and you need a certain type of chair. And making it really clear now that output's a priority, that we now start performing. And we will still be supporting you in all of your performance, but we're now moving ourselves to a place where we can now get on with our work and we have reset the boundaries. So it might be useful to you to think about some of those, and maybe you've been experiencing that yourself now, of putting those boundaries in place for people to re-trigger a different kind of response. So what they've now got is, we've established business expectations and outputs. You can ask what you need to deliver that. We will reward and reinforce outputs and performance. And that's now becoming a new habit and a new way of working. And just finally, very, very sort of quickly on becoming reckless and frustrated. I was speaking to this lady yesterday, I mentioned earlier, who's a director at Diabetes UK. And she was talking about some of her staff becoming a bit reckless. And in lockdown, her husband was on furlough and he's bored, he gets bored. So he built this amazing outdoor barbecue area with a roof. He then put a pavilion up and joined the two together. So socially, when they were allowed, they've had friends over for a barbecue and sitting socially distanced and all the rest of it. And she suddenly thought, wouldn't it be lovely at Christmas to have my team round and we can borrow another pavilion from one of their neighbours and we could socially distance barbecue. And then she realised that 2 of her members of staff are being quite reckless. They're going out and about, they're breaking some of the lockdown guidance. They are visiting people, they're the ones in the pubs and all the rest of it. And she suddenly realised that because she wants to see her mum at Christmas and her mum is vulnerable, she actually doesn't want these people in her house. So she's decided not to mention the barbecue area anymore and not have a Christmas party. So I think with people who are being reckless, it's all about just making your own decision about how you handle that in the workplace. Obviously, they can do what they like personally. It's entirely up to them personally. You know, we don't own these people. But you may make some adjustments sometimes for people that, you know, are maybe in your eyes a little bit reckless, and how you manage them being around other members of staff, and particularly around Christmas parties. So there we are. Hopefully something in there being ready for this so-called new normal of what we're up against, and maybe some hints and tips that you picked up. I'm sure a lot of that you're doing already, and maybe what's been good for you is just to kind of reassure yourself that you're on the right lines, and maybe some of those have just maybe helped you just sit back and refresh and reflect on where it is that you've been and what you're doing, and you're on the right lines and things like that. And thank you for the polls. They're really interesting to hear from like real life people out there in the world as to what's happening in your particular environments. So I'd now like to go to the chat and see if we have questions that people are wanting to ask over here. So, oh, you've popped up, Jackie. Hello, how are you?
No, I'm good, thank you. I'm good, thank you. So just having a look at the chat, that there aren't loads of questions, and I think it's because people have been absolutely enthralled with what you've been saying.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Which means that they haven't been in the chat. No, honestly, I think that's what it is. So we've got the potential for a future CIPD event about quality conversations. So that's really interesting. But I think it'd be nice if anybody's got any questions. I'm mindful that we're at 2:05, but please do feel free to stick around and ask some questions. So Glenn's just asking, can we share the slide deck? And we do share the recording of the session via Eventbrite, via Zoom. There's some wonderful people in the background. My colleague on the branch committee, Julie, who's our chair, she does magical stuff with the recordings and shares them, so you will get that. And Karen, I don't know if you're happy for the slide deck to be shared as
well. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no problem whatsoever. Yeah, I can send that for you. It's not, as you know, as we all know in our world, nothing's original. It's all been nicked. So, you know, very little copyright in there, which is fine. I think the quality conversations things is a really good idea. And I noticed that Joe in the chat said, do you mean tough conversations or welfare type conversations? And yeah, I think that they're two, they can be intertwined, but they're essentially two separate things, where quality conversations are replacing appraisals so that you have those sorts of conversations all through the year as needed. But yeah, tough conversations are something slightly different, but sometimes you'll have them in a quality conversation. So yeah, that's a useful distinction.
Yeah. There's a fantastic question just coming from Justin, which is how to deal with leaders who like holding the cards and playing people off with uncertainty.
Yeah, gosh, that's really hard, isn't it? I know exactly what you mean, though. It's that knowledge is power stuff. So it's a leader playing games with people. I guess again with our role in HR, it is about trying to coach that leader into realizing that the best they can do for their staff is not to hold them to ransom, but to actually help them shift their minds. I mean, for me, change is all about payoffs. So what's the payoff for you for behaving like that? This leader's obviously got a payoff for behaving in that Machiavellian way. And it's about trying to understand why they've got that payoff, and then asking them to explore what the payoff would be if they were actually a much more professional leader and started to think about letting their people in. And not holding their cards and playing people off with the uncertainty. Because as we know, uncertainty never motivates anybody. It demotivates us. It's not great to do. For me, I'd be getting alongside that leader, Justin, and just finding out what it is that's making them behave in that way, because there's something triggering it, and helping them to move into a space where they will get even more of a payoff by communicating and listening and being clear with their stuff instead of plugging into their uncertainty.
Lovely.
Joe, you've had a sanity check. I'm so pleased. We're all getting a bit insane.
Brilliant.
Well, thank you, Justin. That's great. And I do think that's around. We'll always have people that just behave jolly badly in the workplace, won't we?
We've got some lovely agreement with you there about the payoff, and I was just listening to what you were saying there and thinking that in these times a lot of those personality traits which we've managed previously have come to the fore, and what you said earlier on about self-awareness and how we as HR professionals can help people to develop that self-awareness of their impact on others and their impact on people around them, whether they be their leaders or our colleagues.
Yeah, absolutely. It puts me in mind of the drama triangle, you know, the hero, the villain and the victim. There's something going on in that triangle for that leader, that they're getting some kind of kick out of probably being the villain. You know, I'm not going to show you anything. And of course, the way to break that triangle is always to be adult with somebody and say, what are you getting out of doing that? And to try and move them on. Cool.
Lovely. Well, I'm feeling like we've got a couple of people leaving us all at the moment, so I'm feeling like it might be the opportunity for me to say thank you so much to Karen. That was a really, really excellent session. The fact that people are still here at this point in time says, you know, you've been giving people real value for money. So thank you so much for that.
I've really enjoyed it, and thank you for joining in, everybody. It's really interesting.
Absolutely, and yeah, those thanks are coming in, so it's really, really nice. I'm going to put a link again in the chat to our Eventbrite page, the branch Eventbrite page, where you can sign up to follow us, and that will give you notification of our events. Please sign up to the branch newsletter on the CIPD website, and please do fill in the feedback when you get that feedback request, which will be in the follow-up email from this event. So thank you, and as everybody goes off to their day, thank you very much indeed. But Karen and I can hang around for a little while perhaps, and if there's anybody who wants to talk CIPD, please do feel free.